Hi, I'm Femi OK, bringing you the bonus edition of The Stream. I like to think of it as the director's cut of never-before-seen conversations and must-see-again TV. Coming up, I'll take you behind the scenes of a recent Stream episode about Israel and Palestine. Stand by for some unfiltered commentary. And what does American power look like? In his book, Sorry for the War, journalist and photographer Peter Van Atmel shares 2 decades of photographs documenting the impact of the US military at home and abroad. Be sure to stay until the very end of the show. Peter's pictures are striking. Let's start with an update on the Delta variant of COVID-19. It has been detected in more than 80 countries, and it continues to mutate as it spreads. Here's the World Health Organization's Dr. Maria van Kerkhove with more.
This Delta variant is a dangerous variant. The SARS-CoV-2 virus in its natural form, in its ancestral form, is dangerous to begin with. And any variant that has mutations or a constellation of mutations that has increased transmissibility, that has the possibility of causing increased rates of hospitalization, we don't yet have any indication of increased severity, but increased transmission means that more people can be infected quicker. And if you have systems that are overwhelmed to begin with, and you have more cases that are coming that are needing a hospital bed, your healthcare system, which is already overburdened, is going to be even further overburdened. And that can lead to more deaths. That can lead to many more problems that societies are facing. So this is a dangerous virus to begin with. And a more transmissible one makes our control measures that much more challenging. And that's what we're worried about. We're worried about 18 months into a pandemic. The world is exhausted. I'm exhausted, you're exhausted, but it's like we're running a marathon at a full sprint on uneven terrain through a very dark tunnel. And now we have these twists and turns. And it's something that we expect, because the more the virus circulates, the more it has a chance to mutate. So this is convergent evolution. This is what is expected. But this makes our job, all of us, because every single one of us around the world has a role to play, that much harder. But we can still do this. We can still end this.
If it's a Delta variant, that means that we're 4 variants that we know of. Are there others out there, Dr. Maria, that we should be concerned about? You said this is the natural pathway of a virus, so there's going to be more. We might even run out of the Greek alphabet. Who knows?
We will probably run out of the Greek alphabet, but we will have more letters that will be there. But keep in mind, there are 4 variants of concern: the alpha, beta, gamma, delta. The delta variant is the one that's most concerning right now because it has it's more transmissible than the alpha variant, that B117. We have 6 or 7 variants of interest that we are tracking at the global level. Some of these variants of interest may become variants of concern, which means they have demonstrated increased severity or transmissibility, but some of them may fall off of our list. We may follow them for some time, and then they may turn out to be not as, I hate to use the word concerning because they're all concerning, but we have a global system in place. This is what we want people to know about out there, is that as the virus changes, we are working with scientists all over the world, and I mean all over the world, not just in high-income countries, but high and low-income countries, to track these variants, to improve genetic sequencing so that we have better eyes and ears about which mutations are out there, what is out there. And we have a system in place to assess these mutations. Not all of them are important. Some of them do not confer any fitness to the virus so that it transmits more easily. And some are quite detrimental to the virus itself, and they die out. But we have a global system in place to track them and then to inform our public health and social measures, our vaccines, our diagnostics. And the good news is our public health and social measures work at individual level measures, our IPC measures, our diagnostics work, our vaccines work against even the Delta variant. But we do need people to get the full dose. And if your vaccine that you are offered gives you 2 doses, get that 2nd dose. But we need vaccines around the world. We do not have vaccines reaching those who are most in need. Less than 1% of low-income countries have had people vaccinated. And that is just appalling. And so we're working on that through our COVAX partners to be able to increase that. But we need to vaccinate those who are most at risk: people of older age, people with underlying condition, and most importantly, our frontline workers, people who are out there that are caring for sick individuals, putting themselves on the line. So there's a lot to do.
Oh, there's an enormous amount to do. Dr. Maria van Kerkhove from the WHO. The stream has been checking in regularly on news from Israel and Palestine. Guests Fatima Abdulkarim, Anshul Vora and Omar Badar had so much to say that our conversation continued long after the live show had ended. I wanted to know what fuels their passion to keep covering a story that's long, complicated and painful to tell.
I think everybody has a natural instinct to reject unfairness and inequality and injustice, and this is a blatant case that not a lot of people know about, and I feel like the more you get the word out, the more you're going to get solidarity building with oppressed people. And I feel a personal responsibility to do this work, given the fact that I know so much about it, to make sure that people understand what's actually unfolding. And honestly, there are many promising signs right now in terms of shifting discourse, the number of celebrities who are speaking out in support of Palestinians. Things are clearly changing, and I think that's an incredibly inspiring moment for us to keep the pressure on to hopefully eventually get to a point where Palestinians can enjoy human rights.
Anshul, for you, what keeps you on the story? You've been doing this for years.
Well, I sort of feel it's just such an important human story. I see that there are these two people. One has been pushed out by another who was pushed out by somebody else. And why should they be fighting each other, and why shouldn't they be sort of more understanding? And that, to me, I'm not Israeli, I'm not Palestinian, I'm not an Arab. To me, it sort of feels like an important subject to talk about in the region, because this is also a very divisive issue in the region, and just, I think, one of the most human stories to be told.
Fatima.
Well, what fuels me is the question I keep asking myself: how is what anybody is doing making things any better? I keep asking myself, how is what I'm doing making things any better? And I keep telling stories that I observe on a daily basis. So this is a natural instinct, like Omar said, but it's also a game changer when it comes to stories of people who are being locked out of their homes, locked out of their lands, and not being able to live where they want to live.
On this,
if I can add something to that real quick, I think there's also, for the people living in the United States, I think there's the added moral responsibility to object to the fact that our government makes Israeli apartheid possible. Israel would not be able to carry on with this occupation without the massive American funding that it receives. And that's our tax dollars for people who are living in the United States. We are paying for this. And I think that there is a moral responsibility to demand that our money is not spent in that way. And I think that that's a huge motivating factor for people who understand the situation on the ground and who are living in this unfortunate reality where our government makes Israel's crimes against Palestinians possible and denies Palestinians their basic freedom.
I'm going to be honest here. We cover Israel-Palestine on the stream often, regularly, and I was surprised by the video that I played you earlier of the settlement, because I'd never seen anything quite so blatant before. I want to play a little clip, and without the filter, I would love you all to respond to the little clip that I'm going to play. So let's go back to this promotional video for a settlement that is even illegal in Israel for it to be here. Let's have a look, let's have a listen.
It's not just building a community, it's not just establishing a settlement, it's an answer to the attacks from Gaza, from the north, objection to the very fact that Jews established such a beautiful state. Not only do we stand strong, we are building here Eviatar, and we will build many more communities all over the area of Judea and Samaria. In order for this to happen.
Okay, it just shows that history is different depending on who's telling the story. Fatima, what do you see when you see that?
I see Israeli politics playing into how mainstream settler approach is inside Israel. This is the result of a toothless international community, Israeli settler violence and settlement expansion, colonialism basically going on and on, unpunished for years, that now even an illegal outpost that is not even set up for eviction is going to be a story about dismantling human lives, similar to what is happening in Sheikh Jarrah or in Silwan. But if I may, this is a relative short history compared to the history of people who have been living in their homes for years and for decades. This is a situation where the Israeli government will have to answer to the question of how important it is for Bennett, Netanyahu, Lapid, or anybody else who comes in office to answer to the settler institutions that have become part of the state.
Before I let you go, there's one thing I would really love you to tell me, and this is from your individual perspectives. What should we be looking out for in the news as far as Israel and Palestine are concerned? What are you seeing that maybe you're not seeing in the news, but is a story that you feel is going to be very important at some point this year? Omar, you go first. It's
hard to pick just one thing. I think, just honestly, Femi, watching the video that you just played, all I can think of is George Orwell. And I've listened to it and I almost hear war is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength. It's really remarkable that land theft can be portrayed as something to really celebrate, as an achievement. And that's only possible when Palestinians are dehumanized to this extent. And really, we're stuck with a situation in which, until Israel views Palestinians as equal human beings, we're not going to see this issue fundamentally change. And we're only set to a new cycle in which we're going to see more violence, more death, more oppression. And this is just perpetual until something really fundamentally changes. So I imagine that the expulsions in Sheikh Jarrah are likely going to make the news sometime later this summer. I think the Israeli justice system is simply waiting for the right opportunity to push forward for it, because ultimately the so-called justice system in Israel is ultimately a legal system for an apartheid state in which the law says that the right to self-determination is unique to the Jewish people, and in which Israeli Jews are privileged over Palestinians, and that's effectively the system that we're looking at. And I think it's really an ugly reality. Anjo, what's a headline that we should be looking out for?
Well, first a quick response to the clip you played, because I mean that is it's heartbreaking, because the Israeli state is brainwashing its own people and not telling them that this is actually somebody else's land, somebody else lives here, this is someone else's home. So it's a double tragedy in my view. I think the headlines we've got to look out for, the first is reconstruction. How is Gaza going to be rebuilt? If you remember, after the devastation caused during the 2014 quote-unquote clashes, many homes have not been rebuilt. And right now, I think Israel is sort of holding Gaza's reconstruction as a card in its pocket and saying and demanding many things of Palestinians before they can let reconstruction happen. So that's the first thing. Second, I would agree with Omar, is going to be Sheikh Jarrah. I think Bennett's government would eventually go through the evictions in Sheikh Jarrah, and they're going to sort of justify it under Israeli law, which in many ways is discriminatory or reflective of systematic discrimination against Palestinians.
It is not every day that we cover a story that could have come straight out of a James Bond film. When former CIA officer Mark Polymeropoulos appeared on the stream, we talked about how adversaries, as he called them, were trying to harm him. Mark retired 2 years ago after he came down with a mysterious illness during a mission in Moscow. You can watch the full interview online at stream.aljazeera.com. Now, what I'm going to share with you here is privileged information never before seen on TV. After the broadcast, Mark told me a few stories from his 26-year career in the CIA. He has a new book out called Clarity in Crisis: Leadership Lessons from the CIA. But how do you get to tell the CIA's secrets without landing in trouble?
There's a very kind of formal process. So what I did is I wrote my book, and then I put it forth to the CIA for a clearance process through what they call their publication review board. So what is really impressive is how much they actually allowed, and I'm grateful for that, because the book certainly talks about leadership, but it also gives a window into CIA, and all the leadership lessons that I talk about always have these operational stories that I think a lot of people are going to find super interesting and compelling. There's not a lot of, CIA officers who come out and tell stories like this. So, totally endorsed, not endorsed, totally cleared by the CIA. So they're not going to come after me. And ultimately, look, the book is a love affair towards the agency. It's really interesting because while they didn't treat me very well in terms of the medical needs I had, it's still an institution that I feel is absolutely critical for U.S. national security, and it was part of my identity for 26 years. And so, I think people will really find it interesting. I'm really excited about the book.
Tell us one story as a tease.
As a tease, well, I have so many amazing stories. But one of the principles I talk about is something called family values, and that's a principle in which in order to lead teams, especially small teams, you have to get everyone to buy into each other, to believe in each other. So I tell a story. And this is I come back from a war zone. Actually, it was in Iraq, and I was receiving a very prominent intelligence medal and award for some of the things I had done there, and my father was invited to the ceremony, and obviously with my last name Polymopolis, my father is Greek too, and born in Greece, and didn't necessarily have the greatest feelings about the CIA. Because of what the role of the CIA in supporting the Greek junta in the 1970s, a long time ago, but nonetheless, this was his feelings. The CIA director at the time was George Tenet, who spoke fluent Greek, and so I asked Mr. Tenet, to take my dad aside, and he did so before the ceremony, and they just spoke together, in Greek. And I came back and I asked my father, I said, "What did the director say to you?" And he just had tears in his eyes, and he said nothing. And then I went and I saw the director Tenet later on, and I said, "What did you tell my dad?" And he said, "I told him you were a hero." And so, it's an extraordinary moment for me, in my family. And so, it's just, again, a reflection of kind of the close-knit group that we had at CIA, really doing some unusual things, but ultimately, helping protect the United States and our allies, in a very complex world.
Mark, tell me a story that you had to take out the book.
No, I can't do that.
Oh, I tried really hard.
I have a story in there about someone that I was handling. This is, we recruit an agent. An agent is someone that we, is providing us information. But the story that I have in the book is about the personal relationship between an operations officer, case officer, and the agent. And ultimately, it was in an area in which, if I make a mistake, the agent is going to die. And so I tell the story, and I tell kind of this personal interaction that we had, because the stakes are so high in what we do. And as a young operations officer in particular, you have to be almost perfect in keeping these individuals, alive. And so I always talk about the life of intelligence officer. It's not taking a psychology, 101 class. It's a psychology 501 class. Because you have people who really depend on you, and so it was an extraordinary job, and I love telling that story because it really is an extraordinary moment, and I think people will find it very, very interesting.
Finally, the mesmerizing work of award-winning documentary photographer and author Peter Van Atmel. When I look at his pictures from the conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq, what I see are intimate images of people impacted by US foreign policy. He describes his style as being respectful photography. I asked Peter, at what point when he's covering a war does he stop taking pictures?
The line is a tricky one. Everyone has a different line at a different moment. When do you photograph and when do you intervene? There have been moments where I've stopped photographing to help. Usually when I'm the only person that can help. If there's other people to help and they know what they're doing, then I'll do my job, they'll do theirs. The first job is always to be humane as much as possible. And I think partly it's in the editing too. When things are moving very fast in a war zone, you're not even always entirely sure what it is you're photographing, in a sense, especially because it's every moment that's meaningful is 1/250th of a second, 1/500th of a second, while you're trying to stay alive in certain cases. No one can process information that quickly. So in terms of being, in many ways, the respectful aspect, and some may disagree with, but that is in the process afterwards, the editing process. So you mentioned pictures with blood in it. There's a picture with a lot of blood in it, for example, but the face of the person isn't visible in it. That person was dying on this gurney in a hospital, and there was no way, certainly, for them to give consent, but I could still make a very powerful image without revealing their identity, and so that's what I did. So I think that's balancing as a journalist as you must with showing the reality of things in a deep and impactful way, while still trying to be thoughtful about the fact that you're dealing with real people here, and you want to treat them in the way you would want to be treated yourself.
I'm wondering, your pictures from Afghanistan and your pictures from Iraq, are they a document of failure, of a conflict that America felt that it could win and yet did not?
Yeah, well, I think there are documents of all sorts of failures. I mean, most specifically, this last book is the document of almost of a failure of imagination for at any point in the last 20 years for the American people to relate to the people in these conflict zones. If I think about our relationship with these wars, it's really about our relationship with our own soldiers. Not about, and we don't know a single face or a name of the millions of people caught in between these wars, the hundreds of thousands who've been killed, certainly many millions who've been displaced. Of course, it's a more literal failure, yes, of the fact that 20 years in, we're abandoning Afghanistan, and to what end? That's a complicated decision, of course, not a straightforward one, but you have to look at the results after 20 years of conflict, and where the results are going to go in the coming years. Not into a good place, one would imagine. Iraq destabilized, deeply destabilized, with the very limited democratic principles there. So you have to look at what were the intended effects of going in, and how do things look, and at what expense in blood, in money, and in the soul of the nation, I think, as well. The thing that struck me the most, in a way, was how little connection that the everyday soldier really had to the geopolitics of what was happening and the grandness of the scale of things. In the end, as you were out with individuals who may have been perfectly decent people that were kind of just doing their job as they saw it, but they had no idea of what the impact of their job was. And this is something that I often find troublesome with observing Americans, kind of especially in foreign countries, is they're these guys sincerely thought probably they were doing something good because they were told they were doing something good, and because they thought the legacy of American power was of doing something good. But if they used their imagination a little bit and looked at what was actually happening outside their Humvee windows, they could see a nation collapsing and a people that deeply hated them. And so I'm being very purposefully reductive here. Obviously a lot of soldiers understood what was going on was very bad. Others just didn't care. But it was the sort of naivete that struck me the most in those early embeds. And I kind of get it, because I'm a byproduct of the same society that creates a certain naivete about the nature of American power. And that's why in my work I've been trying to push back against the kind of propaganda that shaped my own identity until I had the wherewithal to push back.
Peter, do you know what leapt out at me from your photographs, many of your photographs? You don't photograph like an American. You photograph understanding the perspective of the people that you are seeing. And that's a very hard thing to do. I'm an immigrant, so I see that. There's always a fault line between what I see from having lived in America for a long time. So I understand how a lot of my American colleagues and the community I live in, they think, and why they think these things, but I don't see the world in the same way. Somehow you've managed not to see the world in the same way. How do you do that? Is that just raw empathy, right?
I wish I could say it was, but I think it's a byproduct of always having a kind of multicultural, both multi-nationality, multi-ethnic group of friends that gut check my own ignorance. And I think one becomes more empathetic and more understanding by being open to other perspectives, and the strength of the thoughtfulness and the passion of those perspectives, and then folding the lessons learned into one's work. So it's been a work in progress. And I mean, it's part of the reason why early on I was more connected to the American perspective, and now I'm trying to show things as complexly as possible, because I've made so many friends also in the Middle East who've exposed my own naivete to me, and then I try and channel those lessons into my work.
That interview with Peter was part of the ajstream Instagram Live series. Follow us at ajstream on Instagram to get alerts for future guests. And that's our show for today. I'll leave you with photos from Peter Atwell's latest book, Sorry for the War. Thanks for watching. See you next time.